Hey, I'm Nathan, and this is how I realized I was never really part of my own marriage. I walked into the restaurant that night, expecting to celebrate the year-end dinner with my wife's family. I was on time, but when I got there, the plates were already empty. The wine glasses were half finished. The servers were clearing the table. They had started without me. Worse, they weren't even surprised to see me standing there, confused. My wife, Sophia, just smirked and slid something across the table. The bill. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just bad timing. This was a message. But why? Why go through the trouble of inviting me if I was never meant to be included? What I didn't know that night was that this was just the beginning, the first crack in the illusion I had been living in. Because that dinner, that wasn't about food. That wasn't about family. That was about control. And the worst part? It wasn't the first time they had done something like this. It was just the first time I finally noticed. But I had no idea just how deep this betrayal went, and how far they were willing to go to erase me completely. So, tell me, what would you have done? The air outside had a crisp chill, the kind that cut through even the thickest layers of fabric. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer as I stepped out of my car, inhaling deeply before making my way toward the entrance of Le Chateau, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of Los Angeles. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim, just enough to make everyone look important, where the hum of soft jazz melted into the air alongside the scent of aged wine and seared filet mignon. A place I had chosen carefully, believing tonight would be special. It was the Vaughn family's annual year-end dinner, a tradition they upheld with all the grandeur expected from a family that valued appearances above all else. This was supposed to be an evening of celebration, of shared warmth, of family. Or so I had thought. As I stepped inside, I instinctively smoothed my jacket, preparing to greet the familiar faces of my wife's family. But something felt off. Laughter drifted from the far end of the room, rich and carefree, an air of completion rather than anticipation. Then I saw them. Sophia sat at the table, her wine glass cradled lazily between her fingers, the dim glow of the chandeliers casting sharp angles across her delicate features. Her father, Sebastian Vaughn, a man who had built his wealth and influence on charm and ruthless business tactics, was leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Lorraine, Sophia's mother, twirled the stem of her glass, a picture of effortless elegance, while Ryan, her younger brother, was finishing off what looked like the last bite of dessert. Plates were empty, napkins discarded, wine bottles half drained. I checked my watch. 7 p.m. on the dot. Exactly on time. I took a slow step forward, confusion settling in. Sophia's gaze lifted lazily from her drink, and a smirk curled at the edge of her lips. Perfect timing, she murmured, as if I had just walked in at the tail end of something I wasn't meant to witness. A chuckle rippled through the table. Lorraine, ever the polished matriarch, exchanged a glance with Sebastian before taking another slow sip of wine. Ryan, still chewing, shrugged. Yeah, we got hungry. A fresh wave of laughter followed. I forced a tight smile, feeling the weight of my presence as an afterthought rather than a guest. I pulled out my chair, the scrape of the legs against the marble floor uncomfortably loud in the intimate setting. Settling in, I glanced at the plates, bare except for the faint streaks of sauce left behind. The realization hit all at once. They had already eaten. Not a single plate left untouched. Not a single dish waiting to be served. I opened my mouth, searching for the right words. But before I could speak, Sophia reached across the table and slid something toward me, a small white slip. My fingers curled around the edge, my pulse drumming against my skin as I flipped it over. The check. The total was obscene. Lorraine smiled, her voice smooth as silk. Consider it your present. Sebastian exhaled a quiet chuckle, leaning back, waiting for my reaction. I let the paper rest against my fingertips, the weight of it much heavier than its actual mass. I had always known they saw me as less worthy, less important, less than them. But tonight was something different. This wasn't just exclusion. This was a message. I ran my thumb along the crisp edge of the receipt, my jaw tensed. Then slowly, I tore it in half. The laughter stopped. Sophia's smirk froze. Ryan blinked, clearly not expecting that. Lorraine's smile faltered, the corner of her lips twitching downward. I let the torn pieces drift down onto the pristine white tablecloth, brushing my fingers clean as if dusting off something insignificant. Silence settled over the table, thick and suffocating. Then, calmly, I pulled my phone from my pocket and began dialing. Sophia's voice cut through the quiet, sharp but cautious. "What did you just do?" I didn't look up. I let out a slow breath, steadying my voice. "You'll find out soon enough." The shift in the air was immediate. For the first time tonight, uncertainty flickered in their eyes. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision, and I looked up just as the restaurant manager arrived, flanked by 2 security guards. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, his voice polite yet firm. "It seems there's been an issue with the payment for this table." I leaned back, offering him a cool smile. "No issue at all," I said smoothly, gesturing towards Sophia and her family. "They insisted on treating me tonight." Lorraine stiffened. "Wait, what?" The manager remained professional. "If no payment is provided, I'm afraid we'll have to take further action." A ripple of tension moved through the table. Sophia's grip on her wine glass tightened. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. For the first time in a long time, I watched them panic. I walked out of the restaurant, the crisp Los Angeles air wrapping around me like a long overdue embrace. My breath left my lips in a slow exhale, my mind still buzzing from what had just unfolded inside. The tension at that table, the way their laughter had died, the way Sophia's fingers had tightened around her wine glass, it had been intoxicating. A vibration in my pocket pulled me out of my thoughts. I glanced down at my phone. Sophia. "What the hell is wrong with you?" A dry chuckle escaped my lips. That's what she was upset about? Not the fact that they had humiliated me in front of an entire restaurant. Not that they had eaten without me. Not that they had literally handed me the check as if I were nothing more than a walking bank account. But that I had turned the tables on them? I didn't reply. Instead, I pocketed my phone and walked to my car. Tonight wasn't just a bad dinner. Tonight was a revelation. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and reflections in the rearview mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw tight. I replayed every detail of the night in my head. Could it have been a misunderstanding? Maybe I had misread the situation? No, I hadn't. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The way they had laughed, the smugness in their eyes, it was planned. They had meant for me to walk into that scene, meant for me to feel like an outsider. And suddenly, it all made sense. The countless times before this where Sophia had dismissed me, brushed off my concerns, told me I was too sensitive, when her mother made passive-aggressive remarks about my career, my background, my place in their family. The moments I had ignored, the things I had chosen not to see. This wasn't the first time they had belittled me. It was just the first time I noticed. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Sophia was waiting. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression sharp. The moment I stepped out of the car, she launched into it. "What the hell was that?" she snapped, stepping forward, her heels clicking against the concrete. I met her eyes, unblinking. "You tell me, Sophia. Since when am I not part of this family?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes like this was also beneath her. "Oh, come on, you're overreacting." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Am I?" My gaze held hers, unwavering. "You all laughed at me. You all ate without me. Then you handed me the bill like I was your damn ATM. Her smirk returned, effortless. "It was just a joke." I let out a slow breath, forcing down the anger burning beneath my skin. "No," I said, my voice lower. "It wasn't." Sophia's smirk faltered, just for a second. A crack in the armor, but she recovered quickly. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, her tone shifting, smoothing itself over like a well-practiced lie. My patience snapped. "Then why did your mother introduce you to someone new last week?" Silence. Sophia stiffened. It was brief, barely noticeable, but I saw it. The flicker of surprise before her expression hardened. She knew exactly what I was talking about. "You went through my phone?" she accused, voice sharp. I shook my head, a humorless chuckle escaping my lips. "Number." "Your mother isn't as discreet as she thinks." More silence. A tense, suffocating stillness stretched between us. I had suspected something for a while. The late nights, the whispered calls, the way Lorraine had suddenly started treating me like I was disposable, Now I knew why. They already had someone lined up to replace me. Sophia's lips parted like she was about to speak, but no words came. She was searching for an excuse, an explanation. But there was nothing to say. I let out a slow exhale, shaking my head. "You know what?" I murmured, stepping past her. She turned, arms still crossed, jaw tight. "What?" I glanced back, meeting her gaze one last time. "I should thank you." "For what?" she snapped. "For making things so clear." And with that, I turned and walked inside. Upstairs, away from her. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to argue. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I shut the bedroom door behind me, the latch clicking softly into place. My fingers lingered on the handle for a moment before I let out a slow breath and turned away. I should be furious. I should be devastated. I should be feeling something loud, rage, heartbreak, betrayal. But instead, all I felt was tired, the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones, the kind that has nothing to do with a lack of sleep. I moved toward the bed and sat down, staring at the ceiling. My mind wasn't in the present anymore. It was drifting, slipping backward, past the tension of tonight, past the years of slow erosion, all the way to the beginning. The moment I met Sophia Vaughn. She had always been charming, the kind of woman who walked into a room and owned it without trying. Confident, poised, quick-witted. She knew how to make people feel lucky just to be in her orbit. And I had fallen for it. Fallen hard. I remembered the first night I took her out. The way she had leaned in just enough to make me feel like the only man in the world. The way she laughed at my jokes, not just polite chuckles, but real, full laughter that made me feel interesting, funny, worthy. But now, in the clarity of hindsight, I could see the signs, the little red flags I had ignored, the way she had dismissed my concerns too easily, the subtle jabs she made in front of friends, always masked as jokes, the way her affection came in waves, intense and consuming, then cold and distant. And then there was Eleanor. I could almost hear her voice now, crisp and clear, as it had been years ago. "She's hiding something, Nathan." I had laughed, brushed it off, told her she was overthinking. She loves me. I had been so sure of it. But now, sitting here in the dark, I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. Eleanor had been right. My gaze flicked to my phone on the nightstand. I reached for it, my fingers tightening around the edges. A small, ridiculous part of me wanted to be wrong. Maybe Sophia's family had only just started looking for my replacement. Maybe this was recent. But my gut told me otherwise. And my gut had never been wrong about Sophia. I unlocked my phone, my pulse steady, and started scrolling through old messages, emails, anything that might give me clarity. A few minutes passed. Then I found it. An old email thread. Buried deep in the archives, a name I had never noticed before standing out like a bright, flashing sign. Alex Mercer. My stomach twisted, my jaw locked. The timestamps? They went back to before the wedding. My thumb hovered over the screen. The rational part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in us, in the good version of Sophia I had built in my head, told me to stop, but I didn't. I tapped on the first message, and everything unraveled. "I love you more than I ever could love him. Once the wedding is over, I'll figure something out. He's safe, he's predictable, but you're everything I want." I read them once, then twice. The words didn't hit all at once. They seeped in slowly like poison, filling every part of me until I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated. I wasn't just being replaced now. I had never even been the first choice. The marriage, the years I had spent trying, the moments I had told myself to be better, to be stronger, to make this work. It had never mattered. Not to her. I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something new rise inside me. Not pain, not grief, rage, but not the kind that burned hot and reckless. No, this was something colder, more controlled. I set the phone down with deliberate ease. Then I inhaled slowly, exhaled. This wasn't about pain anymore. This was about control. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I knew exactly what I had to do next. The morning light filtered through the curtains, painting streaks of gold across the ceiling. I stared at them, unmoving, my body still heavy with exhaustion, but my mind. My mind was sharper than it had been in years. I didn't wake up feeling broken. I didn't wake up feeling like a man whose marriage had just been exposed for the lie that it was. No. I woke up feeling clear. For the first time, I wasn't drowning. The revelation of Sophia's betrayal before the wedding still lingered. But it wasn't a crushing weight anymore. It was fuel, because she thinks she's won. She thinks I'll roll over and take it. Not this time. I went through the motions of my morning routine, showering, dressing, making coffee, but everything felt different now. There was a quiet sense of detachment, like I was an observer in my own life, watching myself move through the steps while something inside me had already shifted. I had spent years convincing myself that the cracks in my marriage were fixable, that if I just tried harder, was better, I could make Sophia love me the way I had loved her. That illusion was gone now. I checked my phone, no messages from her, not even a follow-up to the anger she had texted me the night before. She wasn't worried, because she didn't believe I had it in me to fight back. That was going to be her first mistake. I was halfway through my drive to the office when my phone rang. Lorraine Vaughn. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring, staring at the name on the screen, feeling that same cool detachment settle deeper into my bones. Finally, I picked up. "We need to talk," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Not a request, a demand." I sighed, already knowing where this was going. "What is it, Lorraine?" "Meet me at the Regency Club, 20 minutes. And then she hung up. I could have ignored her, but something told me this wasn't just about damage control. This was about power, and I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. The Regency Club was the kind of place where men in tailored suits brokered billion-dollar deals over scotch, and where women like Lorraine Vaughn ruled from the shadows. She was already seated when I arrived, a glass of wine in front of her, her posture immaculate. "Nathan," she greeted smoothly, barely glancing up. "Have a seat." I sat. Lorraine wasted no time. She leaned in slightly, her voice low, deliberate. "You need to drop this nonsense about Sophia." I didn't blink. "Nonsense? You have a good life, Nathan?" she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Don't ruin it over a few misunderstandings." I let out a slow breath, keeping my face neutral. Misunderstandings? Like my wife sleeping with another man before we even got married? Lorraine didn't even flinch. "You were never the right man for her," she said simply, as if she were discussing weather instead of my entire marriage. "We made the best of a bad situation." My jaw tightened, but I forced my hands to remain steady against the table. That was it, wasn't it? They had tolerated me, allowed me in, but only as long as I played my role. Now that I wasn't following the script, they were removing me from the equation. Lorraine leaned back, studying me like a chess piece. "If you walk away," she said, her tone shifting, "I'll make sure you land on your feet. A settlement, a quiet exit. You can start fresh." I met her gaze, unblinking. "And if I don't?" Her smile never wavered. "Then you'll find out how quickly I can make your life very, very difficult." And there it was, a bribe or a threat. She was offering me a payout, but if I refused, she was prepared to destroy me. Slowly I leaned forward, mirroring her posture. "I'm not for sale, Lorraine." Her lips twitched in something almost like amusement. "Neither was my daughter," she said, her voice cool. "And yet, here we are." My fingers curled into fists under the table. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. This was about control, about ownership, about reminding me that I had never actually been part of their family. I had just been a pawn in whatever game they were playing. I left the club feeling steady, but something nagged at me, a lingering weight, like I was being watched. I scanned my surroundings, nothing unusual. People coming and going, a valet pulling up in a sleek black sports car. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Lorraine's words were just still sitting heavy in my chest. Or maybe... I shook the thought away and drove home, my grip on the wheel tighter than before. When I pulled into my driveway, I hesitated. And then, for the first time in my life, I did something I had never considered necessary. I searched my car. It took me less than 5 minutes to find it, a small tracking device tucked under the back seat. I stared at it, my pulse slow, controlled. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This wasn't just about a failed marriage. This was about power, about control, and about survival. I walked inside, set the device down on the table, and stared at it for a long moment. They thought they owned me. They thought I'd play by their rules. I smirked, shaking my head. They had no idea who they just started a war with. I sat in my car, the tracking device resting in my palm, its small, cold weight heavier than it should have been. Lorraine hadn't just been bluffing. She wasn't throwing empty threats into the air, hoping I'd take the bait. She was actively watching me, controlling me, and she had been doing it for far longer than I realized. My jaw clenched as I turned the device over between my fingers, my mind already racing ahead. I couldn't go into this blindly. If I wanted to take them down, I needed help. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew I could trust. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Eleanor Kane?" I exhaled. "I need your help." A brief silence, then, "Tell me where to meet you." Eleanor and I met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place with faded booths, a scratched-up counter, and a waitress who poured coffee without asking. It was safe, quiet, no Vaughns lurking in the background, no eyes watching our every move. She slid into the booth across from me, her sharp green eyes scanning my face. "You look like hell," she muttered, pulling off her leather jacket. "Yeah, well, it's been a hell of a week." She glanced down at my hands, still gripping the tracking device. Her brows furrowed. "Tell me everything." So I did. The dinner, the replacement husband plan, the old emails from Sophia. By the time I was finished, Eleanor was leaning back against the booth, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Lorraine put a tracker on your car?" she asked finally. I nodded. "That's not just rich people paranoia," she murmured. "That's control." My fingers tightened around the coffee cup in front of me. "That's not even the worst part." Eleanor tilted her head. "Then what is?" I hesitated. Something about all of this felt off, like there was another piece of the puzzle I hadn't found yet. Eleanor must have seen the shift in my expression because she sighed, then pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "You ever wondered why Lorraine pushed so hard for Sophia to marry you?" she asked casually. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slid her phone across the table. On the screen was an old news article. The headline made my stomach sink. It was about a failed business deal, one I had been part of years ago. And right there, buried in the article, was Lorraine Vaughn's name. She had been one of the investors. My grip tightened around the phone. She's been pulling my strings since the beginning. I left the diner with my mind racing. If Lorraine had been involved in my past failures, then what about Sebastian? I drove home and went straight to my laptop. If the Vaughns had been controlling me, manipulating me, there had to be a reason, and I was going to find it. Hours passed as I sifted through old bank statements, financial records, anything that had even the smallest connection to Sebastian Vaughn. And then I found it. Large, undocumented wire transfers, connections to offshore accounts. Sebastian Vaughn was involved in financial fraud. I exhaled sharply, leaning back in my chair. This wasn't just about me. This was about their entire empire. A slow smile spread across my lips. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was in control. Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind. "So, what's the plan?" I glanced at my phone screen, where Sebastian's fraudulent transfers were displayed. "I'm going to burn them down." I tapped the table once, my decision made. They think they control me. They think I'll fold. I smirked, reaching for my phone. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I dialed a number, my voice calm as I spoke. "I have some information you might find interesting." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. My fingers tapped against the desk as the weight of what I had just done settled in. Now, I waited. Sebastian Vaughn's empire wouldn't crumble overnight, but the first cracks had been made. An anonymous tip about financial fraud. That was all it took to set the fire. But before I could think about my next move, my laptop screen lit up. A new email. No sender name, no subject. I hesitated before clicking it open. Inside was a single attachment, a DNA test. My breath stalled in my chest as I stared at the document. The test was for Liam Vaughn, my son, or at least the boy I had believed was mine for the past 6 years. The percentage next to my name, 0.00%. My stomach twisted violently. My hands trembled as I scrolled lower. The name of the real father was listed, Alex Mercer. A sickening wave of clarity washed over me. Sophia hadn't just cheated, she had built our entire marriage on a lie. The house was quiet when I walked in. Sophia was lounging on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her phone balanced effortlessly in the other. She barely glanced up as I stepped inside. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I simply tossed the DNA test onto the table in front of her. Tell me this is fake. For the briefest moment, there was a flicker of something in her expression. Annoyance, mild irritation. Then she sighed, setting her glass down. You finally figured it out? My chest tightened. You knew, I whispered, my voice raw. This whole time, you knew. Sophia met my gaze, completely unaffected. So what if I did? I inhaled sharply, trying to suppress the sheer rage clawing its way up my throat. You let me believe? You were a good husband, Nathan, she interrupted, her tone disturbingly calm. Reliable, steady. She picked up her wine glass again, swirling the deep red liquid as if we were discussing the weather. I knew Alex would never be the responsible type, but you? She smiled. You were perfect for the role. My fists clenched at my sides. The role? I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Sophia tilted her head slightly, watching me like she was waiting for me to catch up. You think I married you for love? She scoffed. God, Nathan, you always were so naive. My vision blurred at the edges. Everything had been a lie. All the nights I had stayed up rocking Liam back to sleep. All the times I had fought to be the best husband, the best father I could be. And it had all been for nothing. I let out a slow, shaky breath. Sophia watched me, her lips curling into a smirk. Spare me the theatrics, Nathan. What are you going to do? She leaned back, draping her arm over the couch. Leave? She said it like it was a joke, like she already knew the answer, like I was too weak to walk away. I turned without another word. I had nothing left to say. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming fast and uneven. I needed to get away, from her, from all of them. The streetlights blurred as I pulled out of the driveway. I wasn't thinking, I was just moving. But as I reached for the radio, something felt wrong. The brake pedal wasn't responding. My heart slammed against my ribs as the car jerked forward, picking up speed. I pressed harder. Nothing. The wheel fought against me as I swerved, my pulse hammering in my ears. A second later, crash. The impact sent a violent shock through my body as the car slammed into a streetlight, metal screeching, glass shattering. For a moment, everything spun. Then silence. My breaths came in sharp gasps as I forced myself to move. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, my muscles screaming in protest. I stumbled out of the wreck, the cold night air burning my lungs. And then I saw it. The brake lines. They had been cut. My stomach dropped. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a warning. Someone wanted me dead. I exhaled shakily, gripping the edge of the car for support. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. They weren't just trying to ruin me. They were trying to erase me. My hands fumbled for my phone as I pressed the number I never thought I'd have to call. The line rang once, then twice. A voice picked up on the other end. I need protection. Now. The night air was cold against my skin as I stood beside the wreckage of my car, staring at the severed brake lines. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They wanted me gone. My fingers clenched around my phone as I lifted it back to my ear. The voice on the other end was sharp, alert. They tried to kill me, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. A pause. Then Eleanor's voice, clipped and deadly serious. Where are you? 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Eleanor's dimly lit apartment, gripping a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched. She paced in front of me, her expression tight with frustration. They cut your brakes, Nathan. She ran a hand through her hair. Do you even understand what that means? I exhaled slowly. Yeah. It means I was getting too close. She shook her head, muttering a curse under her breath. You should be in a hospital right now. I leaned forward, finally meeting her gaze. I don't have time for that. Her jaw clenched. So what's the plan? I took a deep breath. We hit them where it hurts. By the next morning, the Vaughn family's carefully curated image was shattered. The scandal had broken. Sophia Vaughn, once a darling of high society circles, was exposed for what she really was, a liar, a cheater, a woman who had built her entire marriage on deception. Headlines flooded news sites. Vaughn heiress exposed in secret affair. Child's paternity revealed. Marriage of lies. How Sophia Vaughn deceived her husband for years. The Vaughn family's perfect image. Destroyed overnight. Eleanor had been quietly collecting evidence on Sophia for months. Emails, photos, text messages confirming the affair. Now, it was everywhere. Social media exploded. Talk shows speculated. Investors whispered. And Sophia? She woke up to chaos. Lorraine Vaughn had spent years crafting an image of perfection for her family. Now, she was watching it burn. Sophia stormed into her mother's estate, livid, her hair still messy from a restless night of damage control. "This is your fault!" she screamed, slamming her bag onto the counter. "You were supposed to control everything." Lorraine, sitting at the breakfast table, calmly sipped her coffee. "And yet, here we are," she murmured, not even looking up. Sophia's hands trembled as she stared at her mother. She had seen Lorraine ruin people before. She had always assumed she would be protected from it. But now she realized too late. Lorraine wasn't going to shield her from this. Lorraine was already in damage control mode. And if someone had to take the fall, it wasn't going to be her. "Fix this," Sophia demanded, her voice sharp, desperate. Lorraine finally set down her cup and met her daughter's eyes. "You were sloppy, dear," she said, her tone devoid of sympathy. "And I don't clean up other people's messes?" Sophia's face paled. She knew that tone, the same one Lorraine had used whenever she was done with someone, whenever she was ready to cut them loose. "No," Sophia whispered, shaking her head. "You wouldn't." Lorraine simply smiled. "I already have." I leaned back in my chair, watching the headlines roll in. One by one, the dominoes were falling. Sophia was scrambling. Lorraine was turning on her own daughter. The perfect Vaughn empire was cracking at the seams. And I wasn't done yet. I tapped my fingers against the desk, my mind already moving to the next target. If they were willing to tamper with my car, what was next? I needed to stay ahead of them. I needed to end this before they tried again. I exhaled and dialed another number. A man's voice answered on the first ring. "It's time to go after Sebastian." The real war was about to begin. The office smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee, a sterile kind of calm that felt almost mocking given the war I was about to start. I sat across from my attorney, Thomas Grayson, as he scanned the documents spread between us, his brow furrowed, lips pressing into a thin line. "If what you're saying is true," he murmured, flipping another page, "we have them." I nodded, gripping my coffee cup tightly. "Let's make them pay." The first sign of desperation came that afternoon. I logged into my bank account to transfer funds for legal fees, expecting the familiar numbers on the screen. But something was off. The balance wasn't right. My stomach twisted as I scrolled, my pulse picking up. Then I saw it. A six-figure withdrawal. Gone. I inhaled sharply and checked the transaction details. Joint account transfer. My jaw tightened. Sophia. That vindictive woman had just tried to drain me before I could fight back. My fingers curled into fists, a slow burn of fury unfurling in my chest. She thought she could cripple me before I even had the chance to strike. Big mistake. I didn't panic. I picked up my phone and dialed Thomas. The moment he answered, I cut straight to it. "Freeze every account with her name on it, now." There was a pause, then a quiet hum of approval. "Smart move. I'll take care of it." I exhaled through my nose, my jaw still clenched. Sophia had just made her first real mistake. She had underestimated me, and that was going to cost her. Hours later, I sat in a dimly lit office across from a private investigator named Jack Holden. He had the look of a man who had seen things he never talked about. Sharp eyes, a quiet presence that made people nervous. He slid a folder across the desk toward me. "You were right to dig deeper." I flipped it open, page after page of evidence. Fraud, embezzlement, shell companies. The Vaughns had been laundering money through their businesses for years. I let out a slow, controlled breath as I absorbed the weight of it all. This wasn't just divorce anymore. This was a takedown. Jack tapped the folder. With the right leverage, this could bury them. A slow smirk pulled at my lips. That's the plan. I didn't go straight to the authorities. That would be too easy, and too fast. No, I wanted them to squirm first. Step 1, leak just enough to the press, a rumor about Vaughn financial mismanagement, enough to rattle investors, enough to shake their precious empire. Step 2. Sit back and watch them panic. That night, I closed my laptop, exhaling slowly. This wasn't revenge, this was justice, and I was just getting started. Across town, in a penthouse that used to be ours, Sophia's phone lit up with a breaking news notification. She clicked it open. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her grip. Vaughn family under financial scrutiny. Investors raise concerns over business dealings. A cold chill ran down her spine. She knew exactly who was behind it, Nathan, and for the first time, she felt fear. I scrolled through the news on my phone, watching in real time as the Vaughn empire began to crumble. The first headline hit, Vaughn Enterprises faces scrutiny over financial dealings. I smirked. This was only the beginning. Sebastian Vaughn had never been a man who panicked. He thrived on power plays, on controlling the narrative. But today, sitting at the head of the emergency board meeting, he looked like a man fighting to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice was smooth, carefully measured. These reports are wildly exaggerated. Vaughn Enterprises remains as strong as ever. Except it wasn't. Stocks were already dropping. Investors were nervous, whispers growing in the background as Sebastian tried to contain the fire. Lorraine sat beside him, her nails tapping against the table in agitation. She had one question burning in her mind. Who leaked this? Across the table, Sophia sat silent, her expression unreadable. For the first time in her privileged life, she was not in control, and it was killing her. I knew they'd try to strike back, so I needed allies. That was how I ended up across the table from Ronan Calloway. We weren't strangers. He had been a friend once, someone who had moved in the same circles, a man who knew the underbelly of the city just as well as I did. But now he was too interested in my war against the Vaughns. I can help you, he said, leaning forward, but you need to trust me. I studied him carefully. Ronan didn't do things out of loyalty. He did things because he saw an opportunity. Why do you care so much about taking them down? I asked. A slow smirk tugged at his lips. Let's just say, I have unfinished business with them. I didn't fully trust him, but I also knew that, right now, I needed every advantage I could get. So I nodded. I'm listening. The more I dug, the worse it got. For them. The Vaughns had spent decades crafting an image of untouchable wealth, but the truth? They weren't as rich as they pretended to be. Most of their money was leveraged, tied up in shady deals, risky loans, and business ventures hanging by a thread. If they lost control now, they lost everything. This wasn't just a fall from grace. This was complete financial ruin. I sat back, exhaling slowly. I didn't just have leverage over them. I had the power to destroy them completely. And now, it was just a matter of how far I was willing to go. My phone buzzed, a text from Ronan. We need to meet. There's something you don't know. I stared at the message from Ronan. We need to meet. There's something you don't know. A slow exhale left my lips as I tightened my grip on my phone. What now? The bar was dimly lit, tucked away on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where conversations never left the walls. Ronan was already there, a whiskey glass in front of him. He didn't look up as I slid into the seat across from him. Instead, he reached into a worn leather folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Before you say anything, he said, pushing them toward me, just read. I hesitated. Then I flipped open the folder. My stomach churned as I scanned the pages. Bank statements, hotel records, messages. So many messages. Some dated back to before our wedding. Others? Recent? Far too recent. She wasn't just cheating. She was living a double life. I clenched my jaw. Ronan leaned back, watching me. She never thought you'd find out, he said. She figured you'd always be too busy trying to fix things. I exhaled, my pulse steady, my hands calm. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even hurt anymore. Just furious. Not the kind of fury that burned hot and reckless. The kind that ran cold, controlled, dangerous. I didn't bother knocking when I reached the house. I pushed open the door, walking straight into the living room. Sophia was there, perched on the couch, legs crossed, wine glass in hand. She smirked as she took a slow sip. You look upset, she mused. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. I tossed the folder onto the table. Explain this. Her eyes flicked down. She didn't even blink. Instead, she set her glass down, stretching lazily. You went digging, huh? She murmured. You always were too curious for your own good. My fists clenched, but my voice stayed level. You used me. She smiled. You let me. I took a slow step closer, my tone dropping. You lied to me. She tilted her head. And I let out a slow breath. You didn't even try to hide it. Sophia shrugged. You were convenient. Something shifted inside me then. The last thread of whatever remained between us snapped. And instead of anger, I laughed. Sophia's smirk faltered. Her eyes narrowed. What's so funny? I shook my head, still chuckling. You think you won, I said simply. Her lips parted, confusion flickering across her face. She didn't understand. Not yet. I turned toward the door, already planning my next move. This time, I wasn't looking back. I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air. For the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was done. Sophia's world was about to crumble. And the best part? She had no idea. But I wasn't finished yet. Because taking down Sophia wasn't enough. Lorraine was still standing. And it was time for her to fall. I spent the next 48 hours digging into Lorraine Vaughn's past. The connections, the power plays, the deals made behind closed doors. She wasn't just protecting her family's name. She was part of something bigger. A network of politicians, corporate executives, and high-ranking officials, all tied together through money, favors, and silence. When Ronan sent me the file, I knew I had hit the jackpot. Illegal campaign donations, bribery, money laundering. Lorraine Vaughn wasn't just a socialite with influence. She was a liability to everyone in her orbit, and that meant she could be taken down. I didn't hesitate. I compiled the evidence. I made sure every detail was airtight. Then, with a few keystrokes, I sent an anonymous tip to a major news outlet, and I waited. Hours later, the first headline dropped. Prominent philanthropist Lorraine Vaughn tied to corruption allegations. And, just like that, her perfect image shattered. My phone rang. I didn't even have to check the caller ID. I picked up, pressing the phone to my ear. Lorraine's voice was colder than ever. You're making a mistake, I smirked. So did you. I hung up. Lorraine Vaughn had never been afraid of anyone. She owned every room she walked into. But now she was losing control, and I was going to watch every second of it. I turned on the news. One by one, her allies started pulling away. People she had relied on were scrambling to distance themselves. The Vaughn's empire was cracking, piece by piece. And for the first time, Lorraine Vaughn was the one scrambling, not me. Then, the final message came. A simple text. You have no idea what you've started. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Good. Let's finish it. The news was everywhere. Lorraine Vaughn's corruption scandal had officially exploded. I sat at my desk, sipping my coffee, watching as one headline after another rolled across the screen. Her empire was crumbling, and I was just getting started. It wasn't long before the first casualty of the Vaughn's downfall arrived at my doorstep. Sebastian Vaughn. Unlike his wife, he wasn't here to threaten me. He was here to beg. He stood in my doorway, his shoulders tense, his eyes tired. Whatever you want, Nathan, he said. Money? Property? Just leave us alone. I scoffed. I don't want your money, Sebastian. I want you to feel what I felt. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You don't understand, he murmured. If we fall, you fall with us. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. No, Sebastian. If you fall alone. That night, a package arrived at my door. No return address, no signature. Inside, a check for $5 million, and a single note. Take this and walk away, or we bury you. I stared at the check, the number burning into my vision. They still thought they could buy me off. They still thought I was the same man they had played with for years. I exhaled slowly. Then, without hesitation, I struck a match and watched the check burn. They wanted me gone. Now, it was their turn. I gathered everything. The documents, the bank statements, the offshore accounts, every last shred of evidence I had collected. Then, I made one final call. Not to the press, not to Ronan, not to Eleanor, to the authorities. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about ending them. For good. As I stepped outside, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The night air was crisp, still. Then, in the distance, I heard them. The sirens. Flashing red and blue lights painted the sky as the first police cars pulled up in front of the Vaughn estate. I smirked, crossing my arms. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. The flashing police lights reflected off the Vaughn estate's polished windows. For a moment, I just watched. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The empire they built on lies, corruption, and control was finally collapsing. I should have felt relieved, but something didn't sit right. I knew Lorraine Vaughn. She wasn't the type to go down quietly. The next morning, the headlines should have been about justice, about the Vaughn's corruption, their illegal dealings, their downfall. But instead, disgruntled husband stages vendetta against prominent family. Nathan Sterling, a man obsessed with revenge. I tightened my grip on my phone, my pulse pounding. Lorraine had struck first. She wasn't just fighting back. She was twisting the story, turning me into the villain. They weren't just trying to ruin my reputation. They were trying to destroy me completely. I got home late that night, my mind racing. I was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. I stepped inside, flipping on the light, and stopped cold. The air felt wrong. A shadow moved in the corner of my vision. Before I could react, something lunged at me. A fist connected with my ribs, sending me stumbling back. Pain exploded in my side as a second blow landed. I barely dodged the next attack, catching a glimpse of my assailant, a hired enforcer, one of Lorraine's men. The fight was brutal. I fought with everything I had, fueled by adrenaline and rage. But he was bigger, stronger. He knocked me to the ground, his knee pressing into my chest. For a split second, I thought, this is it. Then instinct kicked in. I grabbed a broken glass from the table and swung. It sliced across his arm, giving me just enough time to flip him off me. I staggered to my feet, breathing hard. He hesitated. Then, realizing he had lost the upper hand, he ran. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me there, bloodied and shaking. I stared at myself in the mirror, a gash on my forehead, bruised ribs, a thin line of blood dripping down my lip. This was their message. They wouldn't stop. Not until I was gone. For a moment, I wavered. Was this even worth it? Was revenge worth losing everything? Then I thought about everything they had taken from me, and my hesitation disappeared. They wanted a war? Fine. Let's finish it. I grabbed my phone, my hands steady. I dialed the one person who could end this for good. A voice answered on the other end. It's time, I said, my voice cold. Release everything. I wiped the blood from my face. Then I stepped outside into the night. Tomorrow, everything changes. I stepped into the night, my breath steady. The weight of the last few months pressed down on me, but I didn't stagger. This was the final battle. Lorraine had thrown everything at me. Lies, threats, even a hired attack. And yet, I was still standing. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be. The morning hit like a storm. I woke up to my phone buzzing, message after message flooding in. I tapped the screen, my jaw tightening as I read the headlines. Nathan Sterling, a con artist, a fraud, exclusive, was he the one manipulating the Vaughn family for years? I let out a slow breath. Lorraine had made her final move. She was trying to erase me, but I had been waiting for this. I picked up my phone and typed out a single email. Attached, every shred of evidence I had collected against them. Financial fraud, bribery, money laundering, the whole rotting empire exposed in black and white. I hit send. And then, I waited. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, my phone was lighting up again. This time, the right headlines. Breaking, Vaughn family under criminal investigation for financial crimes. FBI involved in high-profile white-collar corruption case. Live footage flooded the networks. FBI agents raiding the Vaughn estate. Sebastian Vaughn, handcuffed and escorted out. Sophia, nowhere to be found. And Lorraine, she stood on the steps of her mansion, watching her world burn. For the first time, she had nothing left to fight with. No power, no wealth, no way out. And I had done it. I sat back, letting the moment settle in. This was what they had done to countless others: used them, crushed them, discarded them. Now, they were the ones being discarded. I exhaled, feeling something I hadn't in years. Peace. It was finally over. Or so I thought. My phone buzzed. One last message. No name, no number. Just 3 words. "You forgot something." I frowned, staring at the screen. Then I understood. There was one last thing I had to do. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. It was time to face Sophia. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The city lights blurred past me as I drove, my heart pounding. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with finality. Sophia was still out there. And before I could close this chapter for good, I had to see her one last time. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped inside, the weight of our past lingering in the air. Sophia stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of wine in hand. She turned slowly when she heard me, her eyes shadowed with something between hatred and desperation. "You did this to me," she said, her voice cold. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "No, Sophia, you did this to yourself." She tried everything: apologies, excuses, half-truths disguised as remorse. When that didn't work, she tried seduction. A lingering glance, the way she let her silk robe slip off one shoulder. But I wasn't the same man she had controlled for years. I just watched her, unimpressed. And when she realized none of it worked anymore, her expression hardened. The real Sophia emerged. "You think you're better than me?" she spat. "You think you've won?" I exhaled deeply, shaking my head. "I don't care about winning, Sophia. I just care about being done with you." And for the first time, I felt nothing for her. No anger, no sadness. She was just a stranger now. I stood up, my gaze steady. "Goodbye, Sophia." I turned and walked toward the door. She didn't call after me, didn't beg, didn't scream. She just watched me leave her behind, and this time, I wasn't looking back. The night air hit my skin as I stepped outside. I inhaled deeply. It was over. Really, finally over. I got into my car, but this time, I didn't drive back to my old life. I drove towards something new, something I chose. The sun was rising as I reached the edge of the city. A fresh start, a clean slate. For the first time in years, my life was mine again. The road stretched ahead of me, bathed in the soft golden glow of the rising sun. The city was behind me. The past was behind me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from something. I was moving towards something new. The fallout was everywhere. I didn't have to look far to see the aftermath of the Vaughn's destruction. News anchors spoke in sharp, clipped tones. Sebastian Vaughn, indicted on multiple counts of fraud and financial crimes. Lorraine Vaughn, under investigation for bribery and corruption. Longtime political ties severed overnight. Sophia Vaughn, disgraced, vanished from public life. I watched the headlines roll in, one after the other, each one confirming what I already knew. They were finished. But as I stood there, phone in hand, watching their empire crumble, I realized something unexpected. There was no satisfaction in it. I had won. I had taken everything from them. But this was never about revenge. It was always about freedom. Later that evening, I found myself at the same restaurant where it all began. The same elegant chandeliers, the same polished silverware. Only this time, there was no mocking laughter, no condescending looks. Just me, sitting alone. A quiet toast to the past before finally letting it go. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a number that once held so much power over me. Sophia's name stared back at me, a ghost of the life I left behind. With a single tap, I deleted it. The final chain was broken. The next morning, I met Eleanor for coffee. She leaned back in her chair, watching me with a knowing smirk. "So what now?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I let out a small chuckle. "Whatever the hell I want." For the first time in years, there was no weight on my shoulders. No strings, no expectations. No one waiting to manipulate or control me. Just an open road ahead. As I walked out of the cafe, I let the morning air fill my lungs. The city stretched out before me. Endless possibilities. Endless chances to start over. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I took a deep breath. Then I stepped forward. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was truly, finally free. Life doesn't always give us a choice in how our story begins, but we do get to decide how it ends. I walked away from the lies, from the betrayals, from the people who thought they could own me, and in doing so, I found something I never thought I'd have again, myself. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain what truly matters: strength, freedom, a life that's mine. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: we are always stronger than we think. Thank you for being part of this journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more, because sometimes the best stories are the ones where we finally take back our power.